It was after midnight on September 26, 1983. Deep inside a Soviet military bunker near Moscow, the fate of humanity hung by a thread. An alarm screamed a terrifying message: nuclear missile launch detected. Millions of lives, maybe the entire human race, depended on one man's next move. That man was Stanislav Petrov. He had minutes to decide whether humanity would survive or vanish in nuclear flames. This is the story of a man you've probably never heard of. A man whose courage wasn't in fighting, but in choosing peace at the world's darkest hour. This is today's bold chapter. Every life is a story, but some are unbelievable. This is Bold Chapter. Chapter 1. A World on the Edge. To fully grasp the weight of that night in 1983, we must go back in time. At the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union had thousands of nuclear weapons aimed directly at each other. Every day was filled with paranoia. Mutual suspicion was normal. Nuclear war seemed inevitable, with both superpowers expecting a first strike at any moment. The 1980s marked the peak of nuclear tension. Ronald Reagan described the Soviet Union as an evil empire. The Soviets, in return, feared an imminent American attack. Both sides lived constantly on the brink of annihilation, one mistake away from global extinction. Chapter 2. The Man Behind the Decision. Stanislav Petrov wasn't a politician. He wasn't a general. He was a lieutenant colonel of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, just another face among thousands. Born in Vladivostok in 1939, Petrov grew up during World War II, seeing the devastation of conflict firsthand. He lost family and friends to violence and grew to despise war deeply. In 1983, Petrov was assigned to a secretive command center near Moscow named Serpukhov 15, where his job was to monitor satellites for signs of an American nuclear strike. Ironically, Petrov never wanted that job. He was an engineer, a thinker, not a fighter. But fate placed him precisely where humanity needed him most. Chapter 3. Midnight Alarm. On the night of September 26th, Petrov's shift started quietly, like any other. But at exactly 0.14 hours, the silence shattered. The screens lit up. Alarms blared. The words blinked menacingly. Launch detected. One nuclear missile had been launched from the United States toward the Soviet Union. Then another missile, and another. Soon, 5 missiles appeared on radar screens, racing toward the Soviet heartland. According to strict military protocol, Petrov was required to inform his superiors immediately. A Soviet retaliation would then be launched, triggering a nuclear holocaust. The world was 4 minutes away from the unimaginable. Chapter 4. Critical Moment of Doubt. Petrov hesitated. Something felt profoundly wrong. He questioned the logic. Why only 5 missiles? A real attack would be overwhelming. Hundreds or thousands of warheads launched simultaneously, not a handful. But his training was clear. Never doubt the system. Always trust the radar. Always follow the chain of command. Yet Petrov found himself unable to obey that protocol. His mind raced, his heart pounded. But his intuition screamed louder than the alarms. Against every rule, against everything he'd ever been taught, Petrov chose not to report the launch. He decided to wait and wait. Hey, you're here for Bold Stories, and we've got plenty more coming. Smash that like button, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and drop a comment to tell us what hit you hardest in this episode. And if you want to ride with us all the way to the top, subscribe right now. Let's make this the fastest growing channel of 2025. It's a community, and you're part of it. Chapter 5. The longest 20 minutes in history. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl. Petrov stared at the radar. He waited for the explosions that would confirm humanity's doom. But nothing happened. The silence in the bunker grew louder than the alarms. Slowly, he realized he'd been right. The attack was false. A malfunction in the Soviet early warning system had mistaken sunlight reflections on clouds for missile launches. Petrov had trusted his gut over $1 billion computer system, and he'd just prevented a global nuclear war. Chapter 6: Aftermath and Silence. But instead of praise, Petrov was interrogated. Soviet commanders couldn't accept the humiliation of their billion-dollar system failing so badly. He was reprimanded for paperwork errors and transferred to a lower-ranking post, eventually retiring early due to stress. The Soviet leadership buried the incident. They told no one, too embarrassed by their technological failure. For decades, the world remained unaware that one man had quietly saved humanity. Chapter 7: Rediscovering the Hero. Petrov lived quietly, unnoticed, in a modest apartment in Friazino, near Moscow, until the fall of the Soviet Union. Only in the late 1990s did the world discover what he'd done. Journalists uncovered the story, and the global public finally learned how close we'd come to annihilation and who had prevented it. Slowly, Petrov was recognized internationally, receiving humanitarian awards in Germany, the United States, and at the United Nations. But Petrov remained humble, repeatedly stating, "I did nothing special. I was simply doing my job." Chapter 8: What could have happened? Imagine the alternative. Had Petrov reported the false alarm, Soviet missiles would have immediately targeted American cities. The United States would retaliate instantly. Within hours, major cities worldwide would vanish. Millions would die in seconds. Billions more would perish in the following weeks due to radiation, starvation, and chaos. The planet would be plunged into nuclear winter, a dark, cold hell that could last decades. Stanislav Petrov had saved not just one life, not just one country, but all life as we know it. Chapter 9: Unsung Heroes. Petrov's story reveals a haunting question. How many other times has humanity unknowingly faced annihilation, only to be quietly saved by unknown individuals? His story reminds us of the fragility of human life, and how peace often depends not on powerful leaders, but on ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps the greatest heroes of our time are not those we celebrate, but those whose courage we never see. Another chapter closed, but the story is far from over. Subscribe to Bold Chapter and never miss what's next. Stanislav Petrov passed away quietly in 2017, still largely unknown to the wider public. But his legacy remains profound. On a quiet night in 1983, he had chosen trust over fear, intuition over orders, and peace over war. We may never know all the unsung heroes like Petrov, those who've stood silently in the shadows, protecting humanity from itself. But we do know this: one man in the right place at the right time can change everything. And perhaps Petrov's greatest lesson is simple. In moments of deepest darkness, choose humanity. This was today's Bold Chapter. If you found this story powerful, subscribe and join us for more stories that define who we are and who we could become.